So let's have a look at the history around about the 15th century and before of these Sephardic Marrano Jews that lived around Spain and Portugal on the Iberian Peninsula.
How many people really realize what happened within the Jewish community in Spain in 1492?
Well, this is a mystery that God has kept for a long time, because we've said that Christopher Columbus is from Italy. No, he's from Portugal. No, he's from Spain. Well, where is he really from? Well, they say that he was from Genoa, Italy, but his Italian writing is horrible. But his Castilian is perfect, So, so be it as it may, recently there is a growth, an exponential growth of discoveries that point to the fact that Christopher Columbus, first of all, his name is not Columbus. His name, and not because I'm Hispanic with Sanchez surname and Martinez and so forth, but his name is Colón. And so in Spanish we have it right, Cristóbal Colón. So his real name is Salvador Zarco. His real name is Salvador Zarco. All right, but now recently we've discovered that Christopher Columbus, Cristóbal Colón, was known as a quote-unquote Marrano. Christopher Columbus, Cristóbal Colón, was known as a quote-unquote Marrano. Marrano? The Marranos are those that were forced to convert to Roman Catholicism, that were Sephardim, and then they were forced to eat pork, which is very unkosher, and then they were called Marrano, pigs, swine, because you see the facade of the Spanish Inquisition. What is Inquisition? It comes from the root word to inquire. But this was more than inquiring. This was spying and forcing Jews to convert to Roman Catholicism. So what's happening during this time is that it's not so much the facade of religion to force people to convert. It was greed. It's because the crown, the King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella are going broke. They're exploring all over the place, wars all over the place. They need money, all right? So who's got the money? Who are the financiers? Who are the ones that are so wealthy in Spain and later Portugal? Well, the Sephardim, the Jews, okay. So as early as 1391, there was a major diaspora, meaning scattering, because of the oppression, tortures, burnings at the stake of the Jews before and after conversion.
The story of the slaves in America begins with Christopher Columbus. His voyage to America was not financed by Queen Isabella, but by Luis de Santiago, who advanced the sum of 17,000 ducats, about 5,000 pounds today, equal to 50,000 pounds, to finance the voyage, which began on August 3rd, 1492. Columbus was accompanied by 5 Marranos, Jews who had forsworn their religion and supposedly became Catholics. Louis de Torre, interpreter, Marco, the surgeon, Bamal, the physician, Alonso de la Calle, and Gabriel Sanchez. The reference is The International Jew by Henry Ford. Gabriel Sanchez, abetted by the other 4 Jews, sold Columbus on the idea of capturing 500 Indians and selling them as slaves in Seville, Spain, which was done. Columbus did not receive any of the money from the sale of the slaves, but he became the victim of a conspiracy fostered by Bamal, the ship's doctor. He, Columbus, suffered injustice and imprisonment as his reward, betrayed by the 5 Marranos, or Jews, whom he had trusted and helped. This, ironically, was the beginning of slavery in the Americas. The source is Adventures of an African Slaver, published in 1928, page 11. The Jews were expelled from Spain on August 2nd, 1492, and from Portugal in 1497. Many of these Jews immigrated to Holland, where they set up the Dutch West Indies Company to exploit the New World. In 1654, the first Jew, Jacob Bar Simpson, immigrated from Holland to New Amsterdam, or New York. And in the next decade, many more followed him. settling along the east coast, principally in New Amsterdam and Newport, Rhode Island. They were prevented by ordinances issued by Governor Peter Stuyvesant from engaging in the domestic economy, so they quickly discovered that the territory inhabited by the Indians would be a fertile field. There were no laws preventing the Jews from trading with the Indians. The first Jew to begin trading with the Indians was Hyman Levy, who imported cheap glass beads, textiles, earrings, armbands, and other cheap adornments from Holland, which were traded for valuable fur pelts. Hyman Levy was soon joined by Jews Nicholas Lowe and Joseph Simon. Lowe conceived the idea of trading rum and whiskey to the Indians and set up a distillery in Newport, where these two liquors were produced. Within a short time, there were 22 distilleries in Newport, all of them owned by Jews, manufacturing and distributing firewater. The story of the debauching of the Indians, with its resultant massacres of the early settlers, is a dramatic story in itself. It is essential to comprehend the seaport of Newport. It is important in order to recognize the Jewish share in the slave commerce. There was a period when it was commonly referred to as, quote, the Jewish Newport World Center of Slave Commerce, unquote. Altogether at this time, there were, in North America, 6 Jewish communities: Newport, Charleston, New York, Philadelphia, Richmond, and Savannah. There were also many other Jews, scattered over the entire East Coast. Although New York held first place in the settlers of Jews in North America, Newport held second place. New York was also the main source of kosher meat, supplying the North American settlements, then the West Indies, and also South America. Now Newport took over. Newport also became the great trade harbor of the East Coast of North America. There, vessels from other ports met to exchange commodities. Newport, as previously mentioned, represented the foremost place in the commerce of rum, whiskey, and liquor dealings. And to include, it finally became the main center of slave dealings. It was from this port that the ships left on their way across the ocean to gather their black human cargo and then derive great sums of money in exchange for them. An authentic contemporary report based on authority indicates that of 128 slave ships, for instance, unloaded in Charleston within 1 year, their cargo, 120 of these were undersigned by Jews from Newport and Charleston by their own name. About the rest of them, one can surmise, although they were entered as Boston, Norfolk, and Baltimore. Their real owners were similarly the Jewish slave dealers from Newport and Charleston. One is able to assess the Jewish share in the entire dealings of Newport if one considers the undertaking of a lone Jew, Portuguese Aaron Lopez, who plays an important part in the overall story of the Jews and slavery. Concerning the entire commerce of the colonies and the later state of Rhode Island, which included Newport, bills of lading, concessions, receipts, and port clearances carried the signature name of Jew Aaron Lopez. This also took place during the years 1726 to 1774. He had, therefore, more than 50% of all dealings under his personal control for almost 50 years.
And so it was this Marrano Jewish community of slave traders who were very wealthy from Spain and Portugal that had moved into London that created the English Revolution. And they raised up Oliver Cromwell and other dissidents there in England. And so they became supported with their mercenary army and their wealth. And eventually the Scottish king, Charles I, lost his head. It was with William the Conqueror that the Jews came into England for the first time in numbers, and it wasn't until King Edward Longshanks evicted them in 1290 AD that the Jews were expelled. And then just before the English Revolution, the Jews started to come back in, and Mr. Carvajal was a famous Jew there in London. According to the history of the Bevis Marks synagogue in London that was built by Jews soon after they were allowed to legally return to England in 1664, Abraham Israel Fernandez Carvajal had originally settled in London around 1632 as a Portuguese Jew posing as a Portuguese Marrano Catholic. These Sephardic Jews moved into the Iberian Peninsula with the Celts when they moved there, all the way from Idumea in the southern part of Judea. Like many Marranos living around the Lisbon, Portugal area, he had grown wealthy from the slave trade between Africa and America and back to the ports of Europe. The London Jews say Mr. Carvajal is sometimes called the first English Jew or the Great Jew, who with a group of about 20 Marrano families lived in London. At the time in London, the Goose and Gridiron Ale House, which was situated there in St Paul's Churchyard, was a Masonic lodge. The Goose and Gridiron eventually moved to the King or Queen's Arms Tavern and later became the West Indian and American Lodge. According to the author Abby LaRudin, the Crown Ale House in Parker's Lane near Drury Lane is where Oliver Cromwell met as a Mason. Together with the two other lodges, the Apple Tree and Rummer and Grapes, on the 24th of June 1717, these four lodges formed the Grand Lodge of London, which became the first Grand Orient Jewish lodge in the British Commonwealth. Anyway, prior to the Jews being legally entitled to stay in England, the Marrano Jewish merchants helped finance and support Oliver Cromwell's new army, made up of local dissidents, German mercenaries, and Jewish money. This allowed for Oliver Cromwell to fight the English Civil War against Charles I and brought about the English Revolution, which culminated in Charles I, the Scottish king, being executed for treason. This is what happened. On the 16th of June 1647, Oliver Cromwell wrote a letter to another Marrano Jew living in Mulheim, Germany, called Ebenezer Pratt. The letter was found in 1813 by Napoleon Bonaparte in a synagogue in Mulheim, which is how it became public. It says, "In return for financial support, will advocate admission of the Jews. This is impossible while Charles is still alive." It was Ebenezer Pratt who drafted the charges for Oliver Cromwell to bring against Charles I for treason, when really Oliver Cromwell was the traitor all along. In December of 1648, the Rump Parliament of England was formed when the majority of the parliamentarians, who were Scottish Presbyterians, were purged, and so democracy was usurped. The only remaining members were called the Levellers, who were the Freemasons who wanted Charles I tried and executed. Hence the name was given the Rump Parliament, meaning the arse end of Parliament. In return for assistance, Oliver promised the Jews that he would help them rebuild the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem, as well as allow the Jews back into England. None of those promises he kept, and the Anabaptists criticised Cromwell for the messianic way he presented himself to the Jews. In 1645, Mr. Carvajal was denounced by an informer for not attending a Protestant church, but was defended by the leading merchants of the day, and so the House of Lords quashed the proceedings. Meanwhile, the Civil War in England was playing out and eventuated in Charles I being executed in January 1649. When the Anglo-Spanish War began in 1655, Cromwell seized all property belonging to the Spaniards living in its territory. But when another Jew, Antonio Rodriguez Robles, found himself denounced and threatened with the loss of all his property, Carvajal led the entire Sephardic community to appeal to Cromwell and the Council State to recognise them as Jewish refugees rather than as Catholic Marrano Spaniards. Suddenly they admitted to being Jews and were granted permission to stay in London. In 1657, Rabbi Manasseh ben Israel petitioned Oliver Cromwell to readmit the Jews legally back into England. Cromwell appointed an assembly of lawyers and divines to look into the matter. They came back in favour. However, the existing English merchants regarded the Jews as competition and were opposed to it, and so it was Charles II who legally readmitted the Jews in 1664. Charles II was thankful for the support some Jews in Holland had given him. 2 years later, in 1666, the Fire of London took place, which wiped out the commercial centre of the City of London, and by 1694 the Jews owned the Private Bank of England, and by 1695 the Bank of Scotland as well.
All right. I hope you guys enjoyed that intro video. That video has some deep information, right? Correlating a lot of the information we've been researching recently, right? About the Sephardic Jews, the Moorish Jews from Iberia, Portugal, and Spain. One thing I did want to say is I hope you guys dodged the hijack big time when you guys were hearing that, because again, remember, history has been whitewashed. So a lot of the images they were showing us were drawings, interpretations of what they wanted us to think these people were like. Again, I know we're thinking so-called Ashkenazic, pale skin Jews, but it wasn't like that. Again, they clearly told you throughout the videos, they're talking about Sephardic, Marranos, right? Iberian people, Moorish people, people of color. We know this. We know that Sephardic Jews in general, there was a general consensus that they were of dark skin, very dark skin. The Portuguese Jews, Spanish Jews was always referenced as being very dark skin. That's history. That's real history. And I bet you a lot of the people they showed in that video, the images, right? I bet you if you research them, there's something about them describing their complexion, being as dark, swarthy. So it's about doing the research individually, no generalization anymore, no more hijacks, all right? And all that African talk, we know they weren't going to Africa to get any slaves. We know who the Spanish and Portuguese were really enslaving. You know, we also know they were doing this to bring over indentured servants from their own countries too. So real quick before we start the presentation, you know, that intro video was just so we can get the people gathered here. Since we're premiering this live, we have a chat, so I want to just salute everybody in the chat. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for being here and supporting. I hope you guys enjoy this. This is again part 7 of Nations of the World. If you haven't seen parts 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the ones previous to this, go ahead and check that out. If you're new to this information, make sure you watch those parts. And if you are actually very new to all my videos, hey man, if you got the time, take 2 years, go back, catch up on the videos. It's been a great journey. We've been learning a lot. We're trying to correct history. We're trying to stop guessing, assuming, generalizing. We're trying to get factual here. All right. So I hope you guys enjoy this. Again, thank you for being here. Everybody in the chat, salute. Much love and respect. Pura vida. Hawah. And let's get on with the presentation. All right. All right, so now I'm going to read from this book. It's from the American Jewish Archives. Sephardim in the Americas. Martin A. Cohen. Cohen, remember, John Calvin was a Cohen. It became Cohen, eventually Calvin. But it was a Cohen. Guest editor, it says. All right, this is the volume. The year, number 1, so the American Jewish Archive, a journal devoted to the preservation and study of the American Jewish experience. And it lists the people here: Jacob Rader Marcus, PhD, Abraham J. Peck, PHM, Managing Editor, Ruth L. Kramer, Editorial Associate, Tammy Topper, Editorial Assistant, published by the American Jewish Archives on the Cincinnati campus of the Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion, Dr. Alfred Gottschalk, President. All right, so we're going to hear from the horse's mouth themselves. Introduction. Sephardim in the Americas. The year 1992 and the observance of the Columbus quincentenary mark a special moment in the history of the American Jewish experience. For a brief time, the historical spotlight will be able to shine on a group of American Jews whose ancestors left Spain at about the same time that Columbus undertook his journey of discovery. And while mainstream America will celebrate the 500th anniversary of Christopher Columbus' discovery of the New World, the same group of American Jews, the Sephardim, will shed tears for the nearly 200,000 Spanish Jews who were expelled in 1492 from a country in which they had lived for many centuries. And who are the Sephardim? Indeed, research in American Jewish history has shown that the first significant Jewish immigrants to this country and to this hemisphere were Jews from the West Indies and Europe, who traced their ancestry to the Jewish communities in Spain and Portugal. So in general, these are not Ashkenazic Jews, all right? Again, Sephardic Moorish Jews. The Sephardim, as they identified themselves according to their prayer ritual, dominated the religious, social, and economic life of American Jewry during the colonial and early federal periods. By the 1830s, however, they were overwhelmed in numbers by a substantial immigration of Jews from German-speaking Central Europe. All right, so then the other Jews started coming in. These German Jews soon developed much of the institutional framework
that would serve as the foundation for a future American Jewish community. The earlier Sephardic community soon became part of American Jewish myth, right? They don't exist. They were viewed as the grandees of American Jewish society, an aristocratic, acculturated group that has now all but vanished as a factor in the American Jewry of the 20th century. So you hear what's going on, right? So this is kind of like what we've been getting to, right? So, you know, a lot of the people of color in the Americas, they descend from a lot of these Sephardic Jews and Moors, people of color, and they had to be crypto-Jews, and a lot of time eventually they just anglicized their name and their lifestyle and their culture. They just, and like they're trying to say here, they vanished, right? So look how even in this academic journal, they're letting you know that these people kind of went underground, like the whole history, not just the people, but the whole history. They were here first. They were the ones colonizing. They were here first. Remember, the other people didn't come until after the 1830s. After the 1830s, we're talking about almost 200 years, right? 1600s, 1500s, right? 1490s, they were already coming with Columbus. Talking about a lot of years here that these people were the ones actually, like it was saying here, dominant, right? This dominant force. As it says here, in the years between 1881 and 1924, this is a lot more recent, right? Over 2 million Jews from Eastern Europe reached these shores and became the dominant force in American Jewish life. That happened all after. You see what they're telling you here, right? This is from the horse's mouth themselves. This is their own people telling you, yo, we got there. Nah, we didn't get there till the 1880s, 1920s. All right, Ellis Island, all that, that's us. Yeah, we didn't come until then. Before that, it was the Sephardis. It was the Sephardis, people of color. All right, so we're going into a whole new history. We got to start seeing things a lot different. All right, they're letting you know. They're letting us know. They didn't get here until, 1880s, 1920s. All right, continuing a little further down. Great explanation here. Little something we went over in my part 3 of this series regarding Sephardi and Sepharda. All right, it says here, to the exiles, the Hebrew term Sepharadi was now applied. So the exiles, we're talking about all these people that got expulsed from Spain. All right. The word Sepharadi and its generic plural, Sepharadim, are simultaneously nouns and adjectives meaning Iberian. So that could be anybody from Iberia, including all the Moors, right? Or in the latter political sense, Spanish. So anybody from Spain. As such, they were previously applied to all Iberians. They were applied to who? All Iberians. Who were the Iberians? Non-Jews and Jews alike. Even non-Jews. We're talking about Muslims, Moors, Moorish people, Moriscos, Marranos. All right. So it was a general term eventually. Popular usage has typically contracted the words to Sephardi and Sephardim, respectively, and created the English adjective Sephardic. All right. So again, remember, this is from the horse's mouth. We're reading from the American Jewish Archives, from the Hebrew University. All right. All these professors with a PhD letting us know. These words are parallel to the terms Ashkenazi, Ashkenazim, and Ashkenasik, referring to German and Eastern European Jews. Right. They're different. The word Sephardi derives from the noun Sepharad, a biblical place name which by the 8th century was commonly used by Jews to designate the Iberian Peninsula. All right, so they're letting you know that this word, they started using it to identify Spain and Portugal and the Mediterranean area right there as Iberia in the 8th century. Now look what it told us. It was a biblical place name. Now it says the name Sepharad appears only once in the Hebrew Bible, in the 20th verse of the book of Obadiah. There we read, "And this host of the children of Israel in captivity shall possess Phoenician territories as far as Zarephath, while the exiles of the Jerusalem community who are in Sepharad shall take over the towns of the south." Now look what it says here. It is not possible to determine the identity of Zarephath and Sepharad and Obadiah. It's not possible. They appear to be the cities Zarephath in southern Phoenicia and Sepharad in Asia Minor. Okay? Now, when you watch my video, part 3 of this series, I did on the Sepharad and Sephardi and the people who they might be mixed with and where the original Sepharad might be the biblical place. There's more correlation, there's more history, there's more records that it actually might be in Asia Minor. And that's what I was trying to say. That's where you get the Turkish, Assyrian, Danite, all these other bloods, Babylonian blood that goes into the Sepharad people that went into Iberia, coming from this region of Asia Minor. So this again from the American Jewish Archive, they're letting you know it actually appears to be there. But what happened? But in the early centuries, the present era, Zarephath and Sepharad came to be identified with the two principal Jewish settlements in Western Europe. So those places, those names were taken somewhere else, were given to other locations in Western Europe. So those weren't the original places, so what they're letting you know here. Zarephath with the French regions. So Zarephath became France, in France. The Roman Gallia, and Sepharad with Iberia. And then Sepharad, which was originally in Asia Minor, actually was changed over to the Spanish Portugal area. All right, they started calling people Sephardi. The Roman Hispania. By the 8th century, the identification of Sepharad with Hispania, though apparently still not universal, appears to have been successfully common. By that time, also the term Ashkenaz in Genesis 10:3, Jeremiah 51:27, and 1 Chronicles 1:6, originally referring to a land bordering on the Euphrates and Armenia, had come to signify the Germanic areas. All right, so you see at the same time what happened? Ashkenaz was not where they're saying in Germany always. They were actually near the Euphrates and Armenian regions, biblically, bordering, biblically. All right, and that's what I was trying to show too. And you know, part 2 of this with the Sumerians and all that, because the Ashkenazi is related to them, and the Sephardic a little bit through their Turkish bloodline. From these original immigrants and their descendants, the term Sephardi was gradually extended to denote 3 other groups: expatriate Iberian Christians who declared themselves Jews, the Jews of the Iberian Peninsula prior to the expulsion, and Iberian Christians under Spanish or Portuguese rule who were presumed to be secret Jews. From this appellation, Sephardi may be further extended to all Iberians of real or presumed Jewish descent who lived and died as non-Jews both in Sepharad and elsewhere. All Iberians, again, all Iberians. That includes Moors, the Moors who were holding it down, right, in Iberia. Great history there for many years. The Sephardi, which all these people kind of related somehow, even though they're different beliefs, different clans, generations removed, you know, they were living prosperous under the Muslim Moorish Empire in Spain and Portugal. Very prosperous. The justification for such extension lies in the fact that in large measure the fate of these people and therefore their opinion in life were linked to the reality, or in some cases the presumption, of their Jewish ancestry. We continue in this academic journal, the American Jewish Archives, Sephardim in the Americas. Portuguese Sephardim in the Americas says here in this chapter. It says Recife. The year was 1654. Now remember, we got a lot of this already in past videos. This is just more correlation from the horse's mouth again. For 24 years, the Dutch had held the Bulge of Brazil. Who are these Dutch? Remember that these Dutch were Jews, Protestant Jews. These were Sephardic people and Moors. Had held the Bulge of Brazil that extends into Atlantic Ocean, the province of Pernambuco, where Recife at its capital. Jews from Holland arrived in ever-growing numbers to join new Christians from Portuguese Brazil who had converted to their ancestral faith. Eventually, 2 congregations were formed: Sur Israel in the island city of Recife, and Magen Abraham on the mainland of Mauricia. By 1641, they had imported from Amsterdam Rabbi Isaac Abod, the Fonseca, and the Haham scholar Moses Rafael de Aguilar, and public Jewish worship was held for the first time in the New World. Synagogues were built as their community grew and flourished. In 1645, however, the Portuguese began a guerrilla campaign that ultimately spelled the end of the Dutch dominion. All right. So remember what we're reading. We're reading this journal from, the Jews themselves. So they're leaving out all who these people are. They're just tagging them as Portuguese and Jews. Now remember, these Dutch are Sephardic. These are Jews and Muslims, right? Trying to practice their religion out there peacefully. And the Portuguese right now are represented by the Catholic Empire. So these are Catholic people against Jews and Muslims, right? Remember, they're being persecuted. In this reference, we see them as Portuguese and Dutch. Again, most of these are people of color on both sides. 4 years later, the colony was besieged. 4 or 5 years, the Dutch held out despite starvation and lack of ships and supplies from the homeland. By 1654, when the Dutch surrendered to the Portuguese, the Jewish population, which had peaked at about 1,450 in 1645, had diminished to about 600. The Portuguese commander, Marrano, agreed to give Dutch citizens the right to emigrate within 3 months. Despite a paucity of available ships, every professing Jew left. The majority seemed to have gone to Amsterdam, when some of them returned to the New World. Others had already been trading in Guianas and the Caribbean and found their way to the new homes in these areas. All right, so remember, that was a little of their diaspora in 1654 when the Portuguese or the Catholic Empire regained control of Brazil after the Dutch, so-called Dutch or Sephardic Jews from Amsterdam were already there for years. Let's see, American Jewish Archives, Caribbean Jewry. The Spanish settlements in Mexico and Peru had attracted many Portuguese New Christians, Protestants, New Christians, Sephardic Jews, Moors, no small number of whom were accused by the Inquisition of Judaizing. Of the islands discovered by Columbus, only the larger ones were under Spanish rule in 1654, Cuba Hispaniola, later subdivided as Santo Domingo and Haiti, Puerto Rico, Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago. The Spanish rulers sought gold or other mineral wealth and abandoned their smaller islands to be fought over by Holland, England, France, and Denmark, which made them bases from which to prey on Spanish shipping, carrying the wealth of mainland America. Sephardic communities soon came to be established in many parts of the Caribbean. Since refugees leave few records, it is difficult to document the arrival of the first Jews in any locality. The existence of laws forbidding Jews to live in a place cannot be taken as evidence that there were none there. For Jewish survival has always required ignoring or abandoning man-made laws, and living as Jew meant taking risk. Thus, allowed Jews were prohibited from settling in England before 1655, and in most of France after 1390. Secret Jewish communities existed in both countries. In the same manner, refugees from Dutch Brazil undoubtedly found homes in the island provinces before their presence was officially continents. All right, they were hiding. While individual Jews can be found on almost every island of the Caribbean prior to the abandonment of slavery in the mid-19th century, here we shall describe only those areas where congregations were organized and synagogues built. All right, so they were everywhere, but they were just focused on this. Was just a brief info, so you can know, they were going through their own little diaspora and going into all these countries in the Americas, right? Before they went into North America in masses. Continues, says Surname. The legend of El Dorado, a city of gold purported to be in the hinterland of the Guianas, led to feudal explorations by Sir Walter Raleigh and other 16th century adventurers. Pirates, the discovery of well-watered tropical coastland brought settlers and inevitable fighting among the English, French, and Dutch that eventuated in the formation of 3 Guianas, one belonging to each nation. All right, so again, these are all tags, English, French tag. These are people that have a certain cultural background behind all these people. Got to get specific individually. Suriname, originally British, but Dutch after 1667, may have had Sephardic settlers by 1639. The Amsterdam Jewish archives contain a ketubah. All right, now when they say may have, see, they're leaving out since the 1490s. We're talking about Vespucci and all these people, Columbia, these are all Sephardi settlers. All right, remember that. So, they're trying to start in the 1600s. No, they were there way before that. The Amsterdam Jewish Archives contains the ketubah, marriage certificate from Suriname dated 1643. A shipload of secret Jews from England. All right, a shipload, not Africans. Remember, secret Jews, these are people of color. These are so-called black people. A shipload of so-called black people, just to put it in reference for everybody, came from England, not Africa, came with Lord Willoughby in 1652. Eager for colonists, he had assured them freedom of worship and indemnization of the right to settle and trade. By 1665, they had built a synagogue in Paramaribo, the capital. We had a whole article in Paramaribo, so a whole bunch of information about the Sephardic and Moorish people who settled there. And again, they were bringing in shiploads. This is just one. They were bringing in shiploads of Sephardic families, people crammed up because they were desperate to colonize, because these people were very good in business, trade, merchant, and what? Sugar planting, creating plants. Remember, they were getting loans and grants. We got this on my past video. They were getting grants, all right, to go over there and raise sugar for the crown, for the Portuguese crown and Dutch. Farther north in Cayenne in 1662, a colony of Dutch Jews, these are Sephardic people, was organized by Abraham Cohen, a financier, and David Cohen, Nazi. As manager, Nazi was typical of the Portuguese New Christians seeking to flee the Inquisition. So who was fleeing the Inquisition? Moors, right? The Iberians, Sephardic Jews. Born in Portugal about 1612 with the name Cristóvão da Tavora, he escaped to Holland and adopted the name Joseph Nunes de Fonseca. So you see how they were changing their name almost completely, all right? Assimilating. To conceal his trail, or perhaps to protect relatives still in Portugal, he became David Cohen Nazi. Nazi was the founder of a prolific and important family in the Dutch colony. His sons Samuel and Joseph Cohen Nazi became military leaders in the Guianas and played a major role in the founding of Suriname's second congregation in 1605. In the hinterland, upriver from Paramaribo, at what came to be known as the Joden Savane, again a synagogue was built, the ruins of which, along with a cemetery, can still be seen in the jungle. The census taken in 1694 shows the Dutch colony of Paramaribo as having 92 Sephardic families and a dozen Ashkenazic ones, all right? What was more? Sephardic. The following century brought such growth that the Ashkenazim opened congregation Nev Shalom in 1734. The community's prosperity brought a rise in anti-Semitism despite the fact that Jewish militia units had helped to defend the colony against slave uprisings. All right, so it keeps going with this information. Then we're talking about Barbados. Barbados is one of the islands for which there is documentary evidence of the arrival of refugees from Brazil. In the minutes of the Barbados Council for November 8, 1654 can be found ordered that the consideration of the Jews and foreigners brought from Barcel to the island be presented at the next sitting of the governor and assembly. All right, now remember, again, a reference. Now, this is very important, Barbados. Why? Because a lot of these people from Barbados, these planters in Barbados, who were actually refugees from Brazil, Dutch refugees, so-called Dutch, they were actually Dutch Jews, they were Sephardic Moors, they were Moorish people, Sephardic, Portuguese, and Spaniards that were running away from Brazil or just coming directly from Amsterdam, settling in here in Barbados. Right? Eventually, they would make their way to South Carolina and other parts of North America. Same people, all right, in Barbados. So it says in January 1655, months before England sanctioned their presence, it was enacted that the Jews of Barbados, provided that they behave themselves, you guys better behave yourselves, civilly and conformably, to the government of this island, shall enjoy the privileges of laws and statutes of the Commonwealth of England and of this island relating to foreigners and strangers. So they were allowed to settle there. You think it was just because they were feeling bad for them? Again, remember, these people were the ones planting sugar. These people were the ones with the connections worldwide. The network, the merchants, Port Jews, remember? Port Jews, or Huguenot Protestant, or the Protestant International Merchants. In April of 1655, Oliver Cromwell issued a pass to Dr. Abraham de Mercado and his son David to go to Barbados to exercise his profession. Both had been residents of Recife. All right, what is the profession? Grow sugar. Returned to Amsterdam, then lived for a time on the island. So he had experience. They're like, yo, Oliver Cromwell's like, hey, can you go set up shop over there now in Barbados? Thanks. Just like you did in Brazil, Recife. The doctor returned to Amsterdam a second time and died there in March 1669. David died in Barbados in 1685 and was buried in the Jewish cemetery. By the end of the 17th century, the Jewish population of Barbados had grown to 250, sizable for an island that measured only 14 by 21 miles. Its Jewish community was organized by another refugee from Recife, who later returned to Amsterdam, known as Luis Diaz, alias Joseph Jesurun Mendes, alias, aka, what is it? Luis Diaz. Luis Diaz, all right? Born in Portugal in 1616 as Ludovico Luis Guterres. Mendes settled in the Bridgetown with his wife and 6 children. So his name was completely different when he was born. By the early 1660s, he had prevailed on his fellow Jews to found congregation. Nidhi Israel, the scattered of Israel, purchased ground and erect a synagogue, following the traditional pattern of English churchyards. Their cemetery, subsequently enlarged, surrounds the synagogue on 2 sides. All right, so there's a little history about Barbados. Continuing, it says here, Martinique, all right, another of the islands in the Caribbean. It says a few of Recife's refugees found their way to Martinique, where they were joined by Portuguese Jews from southwestern France. There was, see how they were just meeting up, like I said. They didn't just come from Brazil. They weren't just refugees from Brazil, all right? So, again, these refugees, they were probably being called Dutch, and then these people were being called Portuguese. So then you forget that these are all Sephardic Moors. These are, again, tags, right? Letting you know they're meeting up. Encouraged by Colbert King Louis XIV's minister, the community grew. By 1676, was able to build a synagogue in the capital town of St. Pierre. That same year, Benjamin da Costa, the da Costa family, we know they were being labeled mulattoes in the States. A lot of them came through Ireland. They were like the Irish mulattoes. The Costas were actually Portuguese Jews. All right, they labeled mulattoes, people of color. Andrade, so Benjamin da Costa Andrade went to Amsterdam to acquire both a bride and a Torah scroll, which he brought back to the island. A 1680 census lists 80 Jews. A subsequent one 3 years later lists 96. But in 1685, the Jesuits who controlled trade in the French colonies took advantage of Colbert's loss of power to persuade the king to introduce the Code of Noir, or the Black Codes. That's deep right there. Wow, I didn't expect this one. So the Code of Noir was not because of Africans or any people they were calling so-called black. It was mainly because who was there? Who was there before the Jesuits? Who wanted to get... They did that because of the Jews that were there. All right? They did it because of the Sephardic Moorish people of color that were numerous in this island of Martinique. So the Jesuits, again, persuaded the king to introduce the Code of Noir, the Black Code, banishing all Jews from French colonies, the Black Code. These same Black Codes was the same ones they went and brought up to North America, same Black Codes. These were for the Jews, so-called Jews, people of color, Black Codes, to get rid of them, banish them from the French colony, the Black Code. That's a major one right there. Man, the majority of them left for Curaçao. Any surviving traces of this short-lived community disappeared when St. Pierre was wiped out in the eruption of Mount Pelée in 1902. The history was erased. What happened? Who was the Black Codes for? All right, so another island was Curaçao. There's whole articles on the people of Curaçao and their settlers, the Sephardic settlers. You know, from a Jewish standpoint, Curaçao is the most important island in the Caribbean. From a what? From a Sephardic Jewish standpoint. It has maintained a functioning Jewish community for nearly 3.5 centuries. From its historic Mikef Israel synagogue went founders of other Jewish communities. Rabbis, canons, and financial aid were supplied to struggling North American congregations. By 1745, Curaçao's Jewry numbered 1,500, more than the entire Jewish population of contemporary North America. A Dutch fleet captured Curaçao from the Spanish in 1634. Who was this Dutch fleet? Who was in the ships? Who was these pirates? Sephardic Jewish pirates, Dutch Protestant international merchants. On board as interpreter was a Portuguese New Christian, Samuel Cohen, and his boy, Samuel Cohen, all the same people who had lived in Brazil in the 1620s and was fluent in Dutch, Spanish, and Portuguese, as well as Indian dialects. Look at that. Cohen searched the island unsuccessfully for gold and returned to Amsterdam, leaving behind at least one other known new Christian, Juan or Julio de Araujo, who moved on to Mexico. In 1651, the Dutch West India Company, who was its founders and main shareholders, all right, Sephardic Jews were very involved in this. The Dutch West India Company, again, they're letting us know something here. Let's see what they're going to say. In 1651, the Dutch West India Company contracted with João de Ilan, a former new Christian, he's not a new Christian anymore, who had been active in the Brazil trade, to bring 50 Jewish settlers to the islands. I told you they were doing this, settling people, Sephardic Jews, full of shiploads of Sephardic Jews. But he succeeded in enticing only 12. Discouraged by the island's barren soil, they all left. 8 years later, Isaac da Costa in Amsterdam enlisted 70 fellow refugees from Brazil to establish Curaçao's first permanent Jewish settlement. Some of their descendants are still there as members of the synagogue. All right, we continue in the book American Jewish Archives, Sephardim in the Americas. And this is in Jamaica now. It says Jamaica remained a Spanish possession from its discovery by Columbus until the British capture in 1655. Thereafter, it became the largest Caribbean island open to Jewish settlement until the Spanish-American War in 1898 liberated Cuba and Puerto Rico. Individuals of Marrano origin settled in Jamaica throughout the Spanish period. Okay, Marranos were settling in Jamaica, Marranos, Black Latinos. When the English conquered the island, they noted that about half the white population were Portugals. All right, so dodge the hijack. Because I want to see the original writing. Where's the footnote? Did they really say white or did they say European population? Because we know these Portugals, in parentheses as they have them here, Sephardic Jews, were people of color. And again, this is the American Jewish Archives. They're leaving out all of the Moorish stuff and people of complexion, and they're not talking about complexion. They're just because they don't want to darken this history, if you know what I'm saying. So it says one of them, Captain Campo Sabata, guided the invading British fleet into Kingston Bay to capture the capital, Santiago de la Vega, which they renamed Spanish Town. The Spanish surrender was negotiated by Acosta, a new Christian, who succeeded in having all the Spanish residents banished except the Portugals, except the Moors, right? All right, so it says Port Royal at the mouth of Kingston Bay was the first spot in Jamaica to attract Jewish settlers, who were granted rights by Cromwell, later confirmed by King Charles II of England. Now, you remember we read in the previous video King Charles' mom describing her son as a very dark boy, the black boy. Jews immigrated from all parts of the Caribbean, as well as from England. By the late 1660s, a cemetery had been secured across the bay at Hunts Bay, where the oldest surviving grave dates to 1672. An attempt to restore the cemetery in 1938 has long since given way to squatters in tropical growth. Kahal Kadosh Nif Tzedek, the holy congregation, the abode of righteousness, was the name taken by Port Royal's Jews for their congregation and for the synagogue they erected in 1676. The name was probably chosen to counteract Port Royal's evil reputation as a haven for pirates and other criminals. Preying on the Spanish galleons carrying the riches of Mexico and Peru to Europe proved a very lucrative trade for some of the town's inhabitants. But Port Royal's prosperity was seriously diminished by a destructive earthquake in 1692. The synagogue was rebuilt, but the town was destroyed again by a fire in 1815. All right, so a lot of history in Port Royal, Jamaica, with the Jews there. All right, and it's interesting, they're telling you, pirates. Remember who the pirates were? Who the people navigating? Who was mooring ships? Meanwhile, many of the Port Royal Jews left after the earthquake and settled Spanish Town. The Sephardim soon founded a new congregation there, Nevis Shalom, all right, Sephardim. What was Sephardim? Any Iberian. Remember what they told us earlier, any Iberian Moors, a body of peace, and were able to erect a synagogue by 1704. The Ashkenazim separated themselves into Congregation Mikvel Israel and built their own synagogue 2 years later. Alright, so they had their own thing. The growth of sugar industry enlarged the Jewish immigration, and a number of Jews became plantation owners. Remember, they were the ones producing and teaching everybody how to grow it, how to set up a plantation system. More than a dozen scattered Jewish cemeteries attest to the location of Jews in many towns. Montego-based Congregation Beth Jacob, House of Jacob, erected a synagogue in 1844, but by the end of the century there were too few Jews to keep it open. Alright, so a lot of history there with the Jews, the Sephardic Jews ending up in the Spanish and Portuguese Jews ending up in Jamaica. And now, very interesting when you think about the whole Rastafari movement and how they say the tribe of Judah and all that. So where really are they getting this cultural background, you know? And it seems likely, more likely they would be from Sephardic Jews and the Moors that were arriving. Alright? Now it says here Nevis, another island, says the existence of a 17th century synagogue on the island of Nevis was comparatively unknown until this author learned of it serendipitously. In 1957, he served a chaplain on a cruise ship sponsored by the Virginia State Chamber of Commerce, which was endeavoring to promote the 350th anniversary of the settlement at Jamestown. The cruise's itinerary included the places visited by Captain John Smith's expedition en route from England via the Caribbean to Virginia in 1607. Among these was Nevis. The author already knew the tale substantiated in his son's biography of him, that Alexander Hamilton, born out of wedlock on Nevis, remember I did a video on Alexander Hamilton, he was Sephardic Jew and Huguenot, basically same thing. Born out of wedlock on Nevis, had been denied admission to the Anglican school there and thus had been educated at the island's synagogue. He grew up like a Jew. When our cruise ships arrived in the harbor of Charleston, we asked to be shown the location of the synagogue. A black native designated vine-covered ruin as the Jews' school. This was connected by a path known as the Jews' Walk to an overgrown field in which goats were feeding, labeled our guide as Jews' burying ground. There the author and his wife discovered 16 flat tombstones in Portuguese, Hebrew, and Elizabethan English, which they copied and subsequently published. Jews were in Nevis as early as 1671, when the British separated the administration of the Caribbean islands into leeward and windward. The presence of mineral springs made Nevis a popular health resort, and the population grew. A muster roll from 1678 lists 5 Jewish heads of families. A decade later, the community had enlarged sufficiently to erect the synagogue. The outbreak of tropical disease followed in 1707 by French raids may have taken a toll of Jews, but in 1723 the Anglican minister reported to England that 1/4 of the island's white population was Jewish, with the Jews catering well to the plantation owners but resented by the Christian merchants. And then it says the islands of St. Eustatia and St. Martin. So starting in 1660, Jews from Curaçao began to settle on the Dutch island of St. Eustatia. Although driven out by the French in 1709, they soon returned because of the island's rich soil and because of the harbor of Oranjestad offered convenient trading with neighboring British, French, Danish, and Spanish islands. All right. A census of 1722 showed 21 Jews. These acquired the cemetery still visible. All right, so they were there too in these islands. And then we got St. Croix and St. Thomas. St. Thomas was colonized by Denmark in 1772 because it is the closest to Europe of all the Caribbean islands. It was a strategic lair for privateers preying on Europe-bound vessels. In 1684, Gabriel Milan, a Jewish soldier of fortune, was appointed governor of St. Thomas by the Danish government. But after 2 years of misrule and apparently criminal behavior, he was brought back to Copenhagen, tried and hanged. In 1733, the French sold St. Croix to Denmark. When the official documents reached St. Thomas a year later, the governor sent Emmanuel Vaz, a Jewish resident, to Martinique to complete the negotiations with the French colonial governor. There is evidence of a synagogue at Christianstadt on St. Croix by 1760, but the Jewish community had disappeared before the end of the 19th century. An overgrown cemetery had 11 decipherable epitaphs dating between 1779 and 1867. All right, so you know how they say the Maya disappeared, this tribe disappeared, now the Sephardic Jews are disappearing. You see what is going on? So did they really disappear? All right, and now we got Haiti. In 1697, Spain ceded the western third of the island Columbus had named Hispaniola to the French. They restored its Indian name, Ayatí. Under Spanish rule, Marranos were to be found on the northern coast at Isabela. There was Marranos there. Despite France's Black Code, despite the Black Code prohibiting Jewish settlement, there are indications of Jews doing business with almost every port on the island during the 17th and 18th centuries. Again, this Black Codes that France put on not only in Martinique, but also in Haiti and all their territories, it was basically targeted to the Sephardic Jews and Moors, these Black Codes, all right? The Gardis and Mendes families of Bordeaux maintained trade depots after the 1750s. A tax list dated January 16, 1765 shows 29 Jewish heads of families in Cap Haitian plus 8 others as either plantation owners or widely scattered areas. Cap Haitian undoubtedly had a congregation and cemetery, but the Black Uprising of 1790 slaughtered or scattered Haiti's white population. All right, so again, they want us to think in this journal, American Jewish Heart, because all the Jews they've been talking about, these Marranos and all this stuff, like we don't know what Marranos mean, are white people. All right, so it's not a black and white world like they want us to picture it, or war in this time, this uprising. The majority of the surviving Jews migrated to other islands or to the North American mainland. All right, now it moves on to what? British North America. All the communities described so far were totally dominated by Sephardim. All those islands, all those countries, all those islands, all those places, all those colonies, what? Were totally dominated by who? Sephardim. Remember, Sephardim was any Iberian, any person from Portugal, any Moorish or Jewish person from Spain or Portugal. All right, people of color. They what? Totally dominated them. They totally, all right, they were there, still there, a lot of their descendants. So again, all the communities described so far were totally dominated by Sephardim through much of their history, although almost all of them had an admixture of Ashkenazic settlers. North America was different in this respect. The colonial communities were totally Sephardic, but the rapid creation of Ashkenazim soon outnumbered the Spanish Portuguese. All right, so again, what was going on in North America? It was totally what? Totally Sephardic. Eventually, it became Ashkenazi, but first it was totally Sephardic. When Ashkenazim outnumbered the Spanish and Portuguese, and as we shall demonstrate, often challenged Sephardic domination in America until well into the 19th century. However, the Sephardic Minchad rite was the American way of Jewish worship in the congregations we shall describe. All right, now we're in this book. I've gone over this book. We read it in my Huguenots video, read a good amount of it. Really good info in the Huguenots video. Again, I recommend you guys to go watch my Huguenot video if you haven't, especially, I mean, it's a 4 or 5 hour video, but it's a lot of good info. I read a lot of things from this book and other information, but we're going to just skim through this book. I haven't read all of it in this book, so I'm going to read it now. It's called and this is a genealogical history. Jews and Muslims in British colonial America. Jews and Muslims in British colonial America. You see these two symbols right here. And then you see the tree signifying a family tree, a branch of genealogy. And you can interpret it however you want. This is by Elizabeth Hirschman and Donald Yates. Very good, informative book, very scholarly, a lot of sources to verify the information they're saying. All right, we're right in the preface of this book, second paragraph, just want to read here. It says, in this work, we present a series of colonial documents, contemporary first-hand accounts, records, portraits, family genealogies, and ethnic DNA test results, which fundamentally challenge the national storyline depicting America's first settlers as white, British, and Christian. All right? They weren't white or British or Christians. All right, you guys ready? We postulate that many of the initial colonists were of Sephardic, Jewish, and Muslim Moorish ancestry. All right, they didn't ever taught this, to us in history. They made us think of the, like this George Washington looking kind of people, But this is the truth right here. All right, that's why I highlight it. Guys, keep that in your mind. All right, correlating with everything we're learning, right? usually arriving as crypto-Jews with their religious adherents disguised as crypto-Muslims. All right, disguised as crypto-Muslims, Moors. These immigrants served in prominent economic and political, financial, and social positions in all of the original colonies. All right, you see, it's deep. Talking about who cares about this, who cares about hugging, who cares about these ain't our people. Hey man, you never know what's in your genealogy or ancestry. The evidence in support of this radical new narrative begins with an examination of the British colonial companies organized in England to bring settlers to North America and exploit the natural riches believed to be there. All right. So now, if you've been following me for a while, if you watch some of my Swarty Euro videos, my Huguenot video, even before that, South Carolina video, you guys kind of already know I have a background. Nations of the World video, have a background of where these Sephardic Jews are coming from, what's their story, how did they become British, how did they become Christian, how did they get erased? Remember, they were saying they vanished, they don't exist anymore. How did they just disappear all of a sudden? If they were the initial colonists, where did they go? Where's their history, right? So we got a background, a big background. I'm glad I did all those other videos before this, even though we might go back into those topics again. Just wanted to lay, a foundation before we got into this. Like this author's letting you know. Of course, both Spain and France had already made forays into North America, found in St. Augustine and exploring parts of the coastline as far north as Newfoundland. Though their activities as foreign powers are given short shrift in our Anglo-centric version of the birth of America, what is even less frequently mentioned regarding the Spanish and French settlements and voyages is that many of the colonists and sailors were of Sephardic, Jewish, and Muslim Moorish descent. All right? That's what they weren't letting us know. It wasn't frequently mentioned that these were actually Sephardic, Jewish, and Muslim Moorish descent. All these navigators, sailors. Several of those on board Christopher Columbus' first voyage in 1492, and famously even Colon himself, were Jewish ancestry. And we ain't talking about Ashkenazi here. We're talking about people of color. We're talking about Iberians. What does Sephardic mean according to the American Jewish Archives Journal, Hebrew University in Cincinnati? Anybody who's from Iberian, non-Jew or even Jew. They were Jews or crypto-Jews. Crypto-Jews. One historian of Inquisitional Spain and biographer of Christopher Columbus, Simon Wiesenthal, notes that throughout the 16th century, the movement of the Marranos to the New World had continued, and that after the expulsion of the Jews and flight of the Marrano element, it was the turn of the Moriscos to serve as scapegoats for the ills of society. Scapegoats. The same writer estimates that all told, Spain lost 1.5 million people. 1.5 million people as a consequence of the purification of its population of Jews and Moors. Where did all these people end up? All these people of color. Many occupations were virtually abandoned, he writes. Trade, the crafts, the sciences languished. Moreover, since the branches of endeavor had been domain of Jews and Moriscos, they had become in themselves suspect. Spaniards had to be extremely careful about entering any of these fields. Spanish life as a whole was the worse for these injustices. Spain was swamped with fortune hunters from all parts of Europe, but they could not revive the Spanish economy. Just as the irrigation canals dug by the Moors in Andalusia were allowed to silt up, so the very channels on which the country's health depended fell into neglect. You hear that? The Moors were keeping it clean. They had the technology there with their aqueducts and their canals. They had the city clean. And, when they were kicked out, nobody maintained it. We document that Spain's loss was Britain's gain. Beginning with the initial planning, organization, and promotion of the first British colonial efforts, Sephardic Jews and Muslim Moors were present as navigators, ship captains, sailors, metallurgists, cartographers, financiers, and colonists. All right, that's big right there. You hear this? This is the real history. I hope you guys see. Again, we're learning a lot. It's just coming all out. This is real history right here. Who was all these captains, all these people providing their ships, their skills and navigation? Who were all these people that they didn't mention to us? A lot of these were people of color, so-called black people, that they left out of history because they wanted you to think these were all white Europeans. So they were a big part of the initial colonial efforts, all right? Among these, we find Joaquim Gans, Simon Ferdinando, Walter Raleigh, Sephardic Jew, Walter Raleigh, John Hawkins, Sephardic Jew, Humphrey Gilbert, Richard Hakluyt Sr. and Jr., Francis Drake, Martin Frobisher, and Abraham Ortelius. All right, so John Hawkins, that's a big one right there because, see, Cape Verde was full of Sephardic Jews too that were sent over there. And John Hawkins supposedly invaded Cape Verde. Now remember, that was a Portuguese colony, meaning a Catholic Empire colony, even though they had Portuguese Jews in there working or as indentured servants, right? So John Hawkins might have gone and taken his own people and went and provided them or sent them and put them in America. All right, so all these people, Richard Halyuk, the Halyuk Society, all the collections they have, the books, these are all Sephardic people. Francis Drake, the famous Francis Drake, Martin Frobisher, and Abraham Ortelius, right? So we might go in depth. Actually, I am going to go in depth more on some of these people, especially with Francis Drake, possibly Walter Raleigh, John Hawkins now, especially that I know in their history, their background, Sephardic Jews, it brings up a whole other study. Now it says here, the first and second British colonies in North America, Virginia and Massachusetts were provisioned, funded, and peopled by persons of Sephardic, Jewish, and Muslim Moorish descent. Again, man, I'm going to highlight this. I hope you guys, I'm going to go slow so we can get this, so you guys can understand all this, all right? So we have a lot of background before this. If you're new to this information, make sure you watch my previous videos. But we have all the history behind this. We know there was black Europeans. We know the Moors and the Sephardic Jews held it down for hundreds of years in Andalusia and Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal. We know these are people in general of color, so-called black people. We know they spread throughout Europe during the Inquisition, and even before that they were being persecuted, taking on many titles: Huguenots, Presbyterian, Protestants, New Christians, Crypto-Jews, Secret Jews, Marranos, Moriscos, eventually taking tags where they were going, the location, the landmass, so they would become Dutch, French, Portuguese, Swiss, English, Irish, Scotland. So all these people, but in reality were Sephardic Jews and Muslim Moors. All right, so you can see again this very first line in this paragraph: the first and second British colonies in North America, Virginia and Massachusetts. All right, they were provisioned. All right, who was running the merchandise, the market, the network, the shipping, the trade? Of course, it was provisioned and funded and peopled by the Sephardic Jews and Muslim Moorish descent. They had lost almost everything in their homeland, but they had a whole new promised land. Current genealogical studies of the Appalachian descendants of these early colonists demonstrate that they carried DNA haplotypes, male or female lineages, and genes from Sephardic, Ottoman, and North African founders. You'll find all this history around in all these tribes. Again, we read about the Melungeons, but other tribes do have it too. A lot of these tribes, sometimes even the indigenous people would take on these tags, like saying they're Turkish or North African, because at the time it was better to say that than Indian, or vice versa. And when Moors and Sephardic Jews would come, they would marry into the indigenous people's family, and sometimes it would be best for them to just say they're Catawba, Cherokee, and so on and so on. All right, depending on the situation. That's real history right there. All right. Further, these early North American colonists often bore straightforwardly Jewish and Muslim surnames. Attested are Ali, Alif, Saracen, Moises, Bagsel, Hagara, Okazant, and even Saladin. Indeed, given the patently non-Christian backgrounds of so many settlers up and down the Atlantic coastline, non-Christian backgrounds of the American colonies all along the Atlantic coastline, all right, it becomes difficult to ignore the significant declarations of religious tolerance inscribed in the U.S. Constitution. You see why America became what it became. The Constitution, all that. There's a whole background here, not just the indigenous part here from the Iroquois and all that, Confederation and all that, but also what they brought, the Sephardic Jews and the Muslim Moors, what they brought over. Even and particularly New York, founded by the Dutch, as New Amsterdam was heavily peopled by Sephardic Jews and Muslim Moors. New York, all right, understand this, please. And this is not to bash anybody, make anybody feel like they're not indigenous or anything, but you understand a lot of these people, and they had a lot of offspring and descendants that they left behind in these places, like in New York, right? Who are these people mixing with the Shinnecock, with ODB's family? Who's ODB? Can he have also Sephardic Jew and Muslim Moor in him other than Shinnecock? Most likely, yes. This is what I'm trying to explain, all right? But I don't know. He might be more one side or more on the other side. Who knows? I'm just saying it's part of the history. And again, these are people of color, so-called black people, right? Founded by Dutch, as New Amsterdam was, all right? And these Dutch were Sephardic Jews and Muslim Moors. The presence of persons from these ethnic affiliations on the governing boards of the Dutch West and East India Companies. Again, another source letting us know who was running things in the Dutch West and East India Companies. Again, Sephardic Jews had their hands all over this. Muslim Moors had their hands all over these companies that were supposed to be enslaving Africans, right? This is what they told us growing up, right? These are people of color mostly running this, financing this, providing the networks, the ships, making it all happen, the networks with their poor Jews, their families, their international, their merchant international organization they had already built for hundreds of years. That was their whole background, even from ancient times. They included Jonathan Cohen or Cohen and Cornelius Spielman, another classic Jewish name. Other New Amsterdam and later New York residents were Jacob Abrahamson and Dennis Isaacson. We present contemporaneous testimony suggesting that even the leading Knickerbocker families of the New York colony, the Van Cortlands, Phillipses, Van Rensselaers, Delano's, and Delanceys were Sephardic ancestry. All these prominent families of New York were what? Sephardic ancestry, Iberian people. This fresh look at colonial American genealogies and settler lists present for the first time in one source the Spanish, Hebrew, Arabic, and Jewish origins and meaning of more than 5,000 surnames. More than 5,000 surnames. You hear this? The vast majority of them widely assumed before to be sturdy British family names of ancient Baron. All right? All these families, all these people thought they were English. All these, the history they told us, the lie, the fake history, the hijack, dodge the hijack. All right? We're going strong in 2021. We surfing the wave strong. Thanks for everybody that's come before me teaching, paving the way so we can learn how to even investigate and study and what to look for. Thank you. Look how far we've gotten, and now we're seeing that there's at least in this book 5,000 surnames that were supposed to be British are actually Spanish, Hebrew, Arabic, and Jewish origin. Many of our name etymologies plainly contradict the standard reference works. The decipherment of surname history is an involved subject, one that can extend over centuries of transformation in several countries and require knowledge of a multitude of languages. You hear that? Do you have that knowledge? And that's what we've been doing in the last 4 or 5 years. All of us. Combining all our knowledge in the different languages with the different sources and everything. For instance, in order to understand the sea change suffered by the ancient Jewish name Phoebus to English Phillips and Scottish Forbes and Frobisher, we already know Forbes, right? We got it in the last video, Farabas. That's a Moroccan name, Forbes. With stages along the way of Farabas and Farabi and Furby, one must have an appreciation for the synthesizing religions of the Roman Empire, including the cult of Mithras, a naming practice of the Greek-speaking congregations of Jews, as well as conversion of Berber populations to Judaism. Berber populations converting to Judaism. conquest of Spain by Berber armies in 710, and subsequent development of Judeo-Arab culture. Not to mention the medieval French Norman, all right, the Normans. Who's these Normans? Anglo-Saxon and Scottish linguistic. We got all that background already, right? Orthographic and social filters. The surname passed through until it became enshrined in modern times as good old English Phillips. You hear that? So Phoebus eventually became Phillips, and it has a whole history there that it just mentioned. All right? Make sure you remember that. There's a whole history behind the surnames and your family's surnames if you have Phillips. All right, we're in the introduction of the book. Again, this is Jews and Muslims in British Colonial America, a Genealogical History by Elizabeth Hirschman and Donald Yates. And right here it says, despite the small nucleus and founder effect, both the Normans and American colonists were extremely diversified in their rank and file. All right, so they're talking about how the Normans invaded England and how these English eventually came into Americas, but both these Normans and these later English colonists who came to the American colonies were very diversified. The former included Danes, Vikings, Norwegians, Flemings, Picards, Bretons, Frenchmen, many from Toulouse and Aquitaine. In the south, the region called Languedoc. All right, Languedoc, big part where the Sephardic Jews and Muslims went after they were expelled, and the Huguenots became, and a number of Spanish or French Jews and Muslims, all right? So the last mentioned typically operated the armories, mints, and construction industries while supplying most mercantile professions with a strong component, as well as all banking personnel and civil servants because of their literacy and fluency in accounting. Remember, they were the ones taking care of all that. A little further down here, it says here, the largest emigration of all occurred with the so-called Huguenots, who, as we shall see, were in many cases second or third generation Spanish and Portuguese Jews, the Huguenots, who traded the French colors for English. So they went from Spanish to Portuguese to representing France, and then from there, representing England, they traded the French colors for English, Flemish, then Flemish, or some other nationality as they fled religious persecution. So they were switching up anywhere they went, assimilated, amalgamating. Continuing, says here, in addition to Jewish genealogies, we have made an effort to bring to life some of the forgotten women who shaped the colonial American experience. These include the ancient mother of European royalty, the Occitan Jewish Queen Ita, Charlemagne's great-great-grandmother, Mary Lago, the Sephardic Jewish mother of the Quakers founder George Fox, right? His mom, the founder of the Quakers, his mom was Sephardic, so he was Sephardic. And Malaya Cooper, the Jewish mulatto wife of Daniel Boone's guide, whose Hebrew name is the same as one of President Barack Obama's daughters. Some of their stories will surprise readers, running counter to traditional historical accounts. Few people realize that one of the Salem witches mounted a legal defense using the family's professional connections and wealth. Sarah Town, Clays, fought her accusers and lived to become a founder of the town of Framingham, Massachusetts, all right? So she wasn't hanged or anything, condemned a witch, because she had her Sephardic connections, right? Legal defense. So she was actually a founder of Framingham. Wow. The mother of Patrick Henry, according to diarist William Byrd, was a handsome woman of the family of Esau. She was an Edomite, whose first husband in Aberdeen, Scotland, was of the family of the Saracens, all right? Or the sons of Sarah. We're talking about, it's just like Muslim people, Arab people. It says the Cherokee beloved woman, Nancy Ward, bore an Arabic name. One of the sub-themes of the present study is the interaction between immigrants and American Indians, all right? Listen to this. Between immigrants and American Indians, all right? Readers will find Cherokee, Creek, Choctaw, and other genealogies that reflect intermarriage between Jews or Muslims and America's native inhabitants, all right? Believed and thinking of the day to be Abraham's children. Who's Abraham's children? The America's native inhabitants, the Hebrews. Who? America's native inhabitants. They were assimilating mixing in and marrying with the American Indians, these same Sephardic Moorish people. All right. We continue in the book, Jews and Muslims in British Colonial America, a Genealogical History. And this is chapter 1. Of course, we ain't reading the whole book. We're just belly flopping, but we try to get some good info. It says here, both academic studies and informal family histories attest that many of the Spanish and Portuguese colonists in Central and South America, Mexico, and the Caribbean were conversos and moriscos. Although they might appear to be good Catholic Christians on the surface, they were in reality crypto-Jews and crypto-Muslims, secret Jews and secret Muslims. All right? That's who the Spanish and Portuguese were, and this is what I was trying to explain to you. A lot of the times, you know, this is what I was starting to see correlate, and this book is clearly saying it now. This study, same research this person did, came to the same conclusion. When you lead, you know, when you look for truth, it could only be one way, right? They practice the traditions of Judaism and Islam. Who? Spanish and Portuguese colonists. And then what do? They practice the traditions of Judaism and Islam. All right, remember that. You guys taking notes, right? So when we're talking about Spanish and Portuguese, remember when you're saying, oh, when the Spanish came, remember you're talking about crypto-Jews and crypto-Muslims. Every time you say, oh, when the Spanish came, or the Spanish and the Spanish, Portuguese, when the Portuguese, well, that you're talking about crypto-Jews and crypto-Muslims who practice traditions of Judaism and Islam in the privacy of their own homes, sometimes in small de facto communities of intermarried family groups. Both Judaic and Islamic law excuse this behavior on grounds that such temporizers were constrained to submit to political pressures to save life and property. The earliest martyrs to the commandment of the Torah requiring Jews to declare themselves as separate and set apart from other people were called anusim, forced ones. The Inquisition rolled out a dragnet complete with tip sheets, rewards, and public spectacles. The feared auto de fe Judaizers as well as Moriscos, Moriscos were the Moor Muslims, were burned at the stake as heretics. Spain's Muslim population survived longer than its Jews, but the final wave of extradition for them came in 1614. They left in droves for safe havens in lowlands, England, and Ottoman Empire. All right, we continue the same book down here. This part we've already read in the Huguenot video, but we're just going to read it again. It starts talking about, you know, the same what's going on in Spain and Portugal and what ended up happening. A lot of these people fleeing to the American colonies. Again, says officials often concluded in protecting persons of Jewish and Muslim ancestry who were important to the smooth functioning of the state. In truth, the three cardinal events mentioned above are interwoven, for historians have identified 5 Jews among 90 sailors in Columbus' expedition. All of them were probably intent not only of finding the riches of the East Indies, in all likelihood of Jewish ancestry. He is believed to have been a descendant of Spanish Jews, the Colon family. So Columbus was Jewish himself. We got another source here who had converted and moved to Genoa following the massacre of 1391. The prominent historian Salvador de Madariaga wrote an authoritative biography in which he came to this conclusion, and Nazi hunter Simon Wiesenthal's book Sails of Hope popularized the idea. All right, Columbus, a Jew. Historians speculate that the first European to sight land on October 12, 1492 was also Jewish. The sailor Juan Rodriguez Bermejo, called Rodrigo de Triana, left Spain upon Columbus' return and entered the service of the Moors in Morocco. His name and the memory are honored today by American Jews, for whom the story of the auspicious beginning is a point of immense pride. Hundreds of Jews exiles from Spain and Portugal followed Bermejo and made a name for themselves as the Jewish pirates of the Caribbean. All right, and I got a future video on this. All right, but yeah, as you can see, we got a little bit on the last video too. Who was really in these ships and what were these people's complexion, all that? Who were they really? Now, did you ever think it was be a Jew? What you thought it was a Jewish pirates of the Caribbean, as Dr. Edward Chrysler calls them, including Moroccan-born Samuel Palachi, the pirate rabbi. The focal point of the present work, however, is not the southern or central portions of the Americas, not the Spanish and Portuguese colonies in the Americas. A case will be made here for crypto-Jewish and crypto-Muslim presence in British North America. We propose that many of the initial colonists in Virginia, all right, Many of the initial colonists in Virginia, South Carolina, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, Maryland were of Jewish and Moorish descent. All right? If not of Jewish and Moorish self-identification or public labeling as such, Appendix A presents an abundance of source material concerning Jewish surnames. The question of any given individual's religious adherence can be bracketed for the time being. At any rate, each claim about religion has to be answered on a case-by-case basis, all right? They made their studies. They know what they're talking about. You got to get specific. No more generalization. And very little research has been completed on the varieties of the Jewish religious experience in colonial America. Appendix B, Rituals and Practices of the Secret Jews, and Appendix C, Muslim Rituals and Beliefs, contain a mixture of religious traditions and social customs. What is central to our inquiry is ancestry. We suggest Dutch, New Amsterdam, later British, New York, and New Jersey harbored and sometimes welcome people of Jewish ancestral origins and affinities. All right. And it breaks down what's going on again in Spain and learn how they fled to France, the Netherlands, Switzerland, Germany, becoming important people there. This part again we got in the Huguenot video. We're gonna get it like this the first time again. It says, although the bulk of the refugees fled to North Africa and Ottoman of Turkish lands in the Levant, thousands of others sought safety in France and the Low Countries. As Protestantism swept across Western Europe, many of these Jewish conversos and Moriscos became often only outwardly Protestant. What? All right, again, let me highlight that. Many of the Jewish conversos and Moriscos became often only outwardly Protestant. Huguenots, New Christians, all right, swelling the ranks of the dissenters. Some even provided leaders for the Huguenots, Hussites, Anabaptists, Calvinists, German Reformed, Walloons, Mennonites, Dunkards, Quakers, Puritans, and Presbyterians. All these people, possible connection, strong connection to Jewish conversos and Moriscos, Moors. When the British, Dutch, and French began establishing colonies on the Atlantic seaboard, they sent as colonists not subjects of high political and social rank from their respective countries, but for the most part recently arrived patently anti-Catholic, newly minted Protestants. Many were debtors, prisoners or servants, indentured, right? Cast-offs of society who were struggling to get onto their own feet in a new country. Continuing in the book further down, skipped a couple pages here, but it says here a good overview of the role of Sephardic Jews in the history of modern-day mercantilism can be gleaned from Sephardic Genealogy 2002 by Jeffrey Malka. This study observes that Dutch Sephardim in the Netherlands were small merchants or shopkeepers. They dealt in tobacco and fish, worked as tailors or goldsmiths, physicians and money changers, and ran grocery stores. But some, such as the Pereira, Barrios, and Pinto families, rose to great wealths. Sephardic merchants dominated the lucrative trade in sugar, tobacco, silk, and precious stones, right? Sugar and tobacco, that's big. Wealthy Sephardim were very important both in the founding and running of the Dutch East India and West India companies, all right? The Sephardis, these are people of color who were very important in the founding and running of the Dutch East India and West India companies. Weren't these companies supposedly enslaving Africans and bringing them to America? There's a whole different story now here, right? Whole different perspective. What were they really using their ships for? A role we shall later show had great significance for the early history of the Dutch colony of New York. Malka further notes that the Sephardim usually traded with their relatives who lived as secret Jews in Spain, Portugal, and their possessions, example, the Canary Islands, Brazil, Florida, Cuba, and Mexico. They used aliases in order to protect their kinsmen from the Inquisition. All right? So they're talking about that global Protestant network, that Port Jews, right? Or the Sephardic global network they had. And so they're showing how they changed their names. So this guy, Samuel Abravanel, became Samuel de Sousa, Samuel Abod, Antonio Sanchez de Paz, Joseph Cohen, Jerónimo Enriquez, Isaac Franco is Francisco Mendez de Madeiros. Menace ben Israel became Manuel Diaz Oreira. All right, so that's how they changed their names, right? Jewish merchants had an important advantage in being able to do business with and draw bills of exchange on relatives, friends, or business associates they could trust. Often, and especially in England, they used the names of local citizens who were sympathetic to their cause as a front for their activities, giving the new associate stock in joint venture. If the partner married into the family, frequent outcome, he became an adopted member of the clan, subject to his rules of secrecy and code of commerce. Are you hearing this? What's going on? So they had even people running for them, basically picking up the money, doing all the work. They had people doing it under different names, so their name wouldn't come up on it. Caribbean Jews. Mordecai Arbel in The Jewish Nation of the Caribbean, 2002, brings us closer to the North American colonies. He notes that as the conversos moved away from Iberia, they formed concentrations initially in nearby Spanish possessions such as Madeira, the Azores, and the Canaries. So first they set up shop there. Remember, Madeira, they were learning and producing sugar. They have sugar plantations, one of the best in the world. In these islands, the Sephardic Jews and Moors. Thus, one clue to the Sephardic ancestry of North American colonists would be trading ties to these places. Conversos also congregated in the French cities of Bordeaux, Bayonne, and Rouen. All right, all those were Sephardic cities. Arbel devotes specific chapters in his book to Barbados, Belize, Berbice, Colombia, Costa Rica, Curaçao, the Danish West Indies, Demerara, Dominican Republic, El Salvador, Essequibo, Guyana or Cayenne, Haiti, Honduras, Jamaica, Martinique, and Guadeloupe, Nevis, Panama, Pomeroon, and Surname. Elias Asmal was governor here. St. Eustatius, Tobago, Trinidad, Tucacas, and Venezuela. All right, all those places. He has specific, they're saying that this guy have specific info on these places where the Sephardic went and held up, created their colonies and everything. It says here, Sephardim pioneered the rum, sugar cane, and orange juice industries. All right, they were running it. According to Arbel, they were prominent in growing and refining coffee, cocoa, vanilla, indigo, vermilion, coconuts, and eggplant. Thus, when we encounter North American colonists engaged in these trades, we should view it as a possible sign of Sephardic ancestry. That's what I'm trying to tell you. When you think about the Spanish over here, or all this, just think Jews and Muslims. Portuguese, this is what they're trying to tell you, especially when they're dealing with trade and ships going international, commerce. Arbel also stresses the Sephardic Jews consider themselves one community, nación, whether they openly practice their faith or were privately observant but publicly Protestant. All right, privately Jews, but they were publicly Protestants or Catholic. All right, Huguenots. It was considered a distinct advantage to have relatives and friends on both sides of the fence, so to speak, to ensure security and protection from potential harassment or persecution. We shall see when we get to New York, and several prominent Christian families were in fact conversos, and that some members of these families married openly Jewish spouses. Continuing in this book, we're going to go to this part. It says Marcus series. All right, we read this again in the Huguenot video. Part of it, again, the Huguenot video is a 5-hour video, so we're not going to remember everything, right? So let's just refresh it, get it like it's the first time here, now that we're reading this book more thoroughly. It says, with its 3 large volumes, Jacob R. Marcus, the Colonial American Jew, 1492 to 1776, is the most substantial work on the Sephardic presence in British North America, all right? So you know what that means? That means I'm going to look for that book, and we're going to read that book too. Marcus traces the roots of American Jews to the important French crypto-Jewish Sephardic community, all right? Beginning about 1550. He emphasizes that many of the Iberian refugees publicly belonged to Huguenot, Walloon, or other Protestant denomination, all right? They were Huguenots, these crypto-Jews. He also acknowledges the crypto-Jewish and openly Jewish Sephardic communities in the Netherlands, which served as the seedbed for the large-scale return of the Jews to England, beginning about 1650, as well as for the foundation of the New York colony. As does Katz later, Marcus focuses attention on the underground Jewish community that flourished in England from the reign of Henry VIII. He suggests, as we noted in Chapter 1, that Cristobal Colon was a converso Jew whose family resettled in Italy, and that not only Columbus navigator, but also 5 additional crew members were Jewish. Alonso de la Calle Marco, a physician who bore the same surname as Marcos himself, Mastre Bernal, a physician, Rodrigo Sanchez de Segovia, the controller, and Luis de Torres, the interpreter. All right, we've got this already. Before he spoke Hebrew, they brought him to speak with the Indians. Sephardim in the New World had a wide variety of occupations and lived at all levels of the socioeconomic spectrum. According to Marcus, they were shoemakers, tailors, blacksmiths, tavern keepers, peddlers, mariners, masons, ship captains, factors, barkers, gold and silversmiths, butchers, tanners, physicians, notaries, mine and mill owners, merchants, candy manufacturers, slave dealers, all right? City mayors, priests, bishops, bankers, tax collectors, and provincial governors. Judaic religious traditions were usually observed in private. Worship services were held in the homes of anyone where a group would gather on Shabbat. Because no copies of the Torah were available, the secret Sephardim would use the biblical Old Testament and the Psalms, sometimes also books like Josephus' Ancient History of the Jews.